Hi class, today we're going to do some exercises from chapter 6 and we'll work on the cost of production report. I'm sharing with you some information from exercise 6-7, and what we're going to be doing is a part of the cost of production report for Jackson products. And so in this particular problem, our unit information is going to start with some beginning work in process inventory. That's a little bit different than what we did in the last video. We have some beginning work in process that we're going to be working with this time. And we're also going to be using the first in, first out method, which is the FIFO method. And the information that they give you about Jackson products is that they are going to be producing a barbecue sauce, and they use 3 departments to do that: the cooking department, the mixing department, and the bottling department. And in the cooking department, all materials are added at the beginning of the process. Notice I've got that highlighted because that's important for you to realize that all of the materials are going to be added at the beginning of the process. No materials are going to be added at any other time, just through the beginning of the process. The output is going to be measured in ounces, and the production data for July are as follows. And what they've given us is the beginning inventory units that are 60% complete. And that means there's 60% complete with respect to conversion cost. I want to emphasize that it's 60% complete with respect to conversion cost. The units at the beginning inventory are 10,000 units. They also told us how many units we completed and we transferred out. When we've completed and transferred out the units, that means we're taking them out of the work in process account and sending them to the next department. Now, they really didn't tell us what department it is that we're preparing this information for. They did tell us there were 3 departments and that this was a Jackson company, but I really don't know which department we're preparing this information for. But I can tell you that in a process cost accounting system, which is what we're doing here, you would start in one department, and once it's completed in that department, you'd send it to the next department. So we probably started in the cooking department. We would send it to the mixing department, and then we're going to bottle it. That's my guess is how the cost would flow throughout this particular company. So they did tell us how many units that they completed and they transferred out, but they don't really tell us what department we're working with. They also give you the units in process at the end of the accounting period, and they say they're 80% complete. And it's important for you to realize that they're 80% complete with respect to conversion cost. Now, if you don't remember what conversion costs were, we kind of went over that in an earlier chapter. Your conversion costs are your direct labor and your factory overhead combined. So you'll remember your production costs are for materials, labor, and overhead. So when we're preparing a cost of production report, which is what you're going to have to do eventually, you're going to be looking at your material separate from your conversion, but your conversion costs are your direct labor and your factory overhead. Now, in part number 1, they want you to prepare what is called a physical flow schedule for July. And what a physical flow schedule is, it's the whole units that are in the cost of production report. So what I feel like is important is that you know how to prepare a cost of production report. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what a cost of production report would look like, at least the first half of it, where we're just dealing with units for this company. I prepared a cost of production report for you, and that will emphasize the physical flow of the whole units in this department for the month of July. So what I went ahead and did is I started a cost of production report. And in cost of production report, we're going to break it down into two parts. There's a part for units and there's going to be a part for cost. In this particular problem, they're not asking you anything about cost yet. We'll get to that in the next problem that we're going to do today. So we're just kind of starting you out easy with the first part of the cost of production report. You might remember that you prepared this cost of production report in ACC 121. This is a cost of production report that is using the FIFO method, and that's what we emphasized in ACC 121. And today we're just reviewing mainly what you should already know from ACC 121. And then in the next recording, I'm going to do one that has to do with the weighted average method, which you're not going to be as familiar with. So some of this is probably going to be a review for you. I hope it is. And I want to emphasize to you that you really need to know how to do the cost of production report. And so this first half of the cost of production report is what we're talking about in this particular exercise. So we want to do a physical flow schedule, which is a whole unit schedule here. And what I've done is I've just put it in the form of a column here for your whole units. And this is how we started the cost of production report in ACC 121. And so again, this should be a review to you. So we're going to start with our beginning inventory units. Our whole units of beginning inventory were given to us. That's the 10,000 that we got up here. We just plug that in right there. And then what we have to do is we have to find the units that are started or that might be received in from a previous department. Since I didn't know what department we're preparing this for, and by the way, a cost of production report would be prepared for each department separately. You might remember that when we talk about a process cost accounting system, that each department has their own separate work in process account. And a cost of production report is basically the work in process account for a particular department. So we don't know what the name of the department was, but we do know that we're preparing a schedule of the whole units, and this is how we would do it here in the cost of production report. Since we don't know how many units were started, they didn't tell us that. We would have to find the units that are started. We also don't know the total units to account for, but we can determine this part in the second part of the unit section on the cost of production report. So what I would say to you, if you were filling out a cost of production report, write down the different lines of the cost of production report first, then fill in the information that you do know and work backwards to find the information that you don't know. So what we do know here is that we have 10,000 units in beginning inventory. They told us this. So since we had 10,000 units in beginning inventory, we also know that when we break those $10,000 units down into the equivalent units, that we have 10,000 whole units of beginning inventory. So it's like we're going to reconcile this top part to this bottom part here as far as whole units are concerned. So just fill in what you do know. We do know that there was beginning inventory. We don't know what units were started and completed, so we'd have to find this 70,000. But they did tell us how many units were transferred. You see right here where it says units completed and transferred out is 80,000. So what I did is I just plugged that $80,000 in, not dollars, but units in at the units transferred. They told us this, and we knew what the beginning inventory was. So you can find the units that were actually started during this period of time and finished during this period of time by subtracting the beginning inventory units from the units transferred. So subtract your beginning inventory units from the units transferred, and that will give you the units that are started and completed. So once you know the units started and completed, you could go back and add the beginning inventory units to it, and it will give you the units transferred. The next thing we need to put in is our ending inventory. And they gave us this ending inventory at 15,000. You see here that it's 80% complete with respect to conversion. 15,000 is our ending inventory whole units here. So if you add your units transferred plus your ending inventory, it will give you the total units to be assigned cost, which is 95,000 units. Once we know this 95,000 units, we can go back and plug that in for our total units to account for. These two items have to reconcile with each other. Once you know this, then we can determine the units started or received from a different department. The way that we determine the 85,000 is to take the 95,000 total units to account for and subtract 10,000 from it. That will give us the units that we started during this time period. So if we go back and review, our beginning inventory units were given at 10,000. We didn't know the units started and we didn't know the units to account for, but we did know the beginning inventory units that we would plug in here. And they told us the units transferred, so we'd plug this amount in here. They told us the ending inventory, so we'd plug this amount in here. Then we've got something to work for. 80,000 plus 15,000 is 95,000. Once you know the total units to be assigned cost, you can also go back and plug that in for the total units to account for. Once we know this, and if we know the beginning inventory, we can find the units started by subtracting the beginning inventory from our total units to account for. That will give us our units that are started or received. So at this point in time, the only thing that would be left is to determine what you actually started as far as units were concerned and finished during this time period. And to find that, we take the units transferred that were given and the beginning inventory which was given, take the difference between those, and that will tell you what you started and completed during this period of time. So those are your whole units there, and that's really what they wanted in part number 1. In part number 2, they wanted you to prepare the equivalent unit schedule using the first in, first out method. So this is the equivalent unit schedule down here. You can see we have a whole column for that, for materials equivalent units and conversion equivalent units. We have its own column for that. So equivalent units consist of materials and your conversion, which is your direct labor and your factory overhead cost. What we're going to do is we're going to break down the information that we know about the whole units into equivalent units. Those are the units that we could have completed during this particular point in time. So we start with our materials column first when you're calculating equivalent units. And because they told us in this problem that all the materials are going to be added at the beginning of the process, that tells us something about the beginning inventory materials. If there were 100% that were added in materials, then all the materials were added last period, because the ending inventory from last period becomes the beginning inventory for this period. So right here where I've got a 0 for our materials equivalent units, we're not going to add any materials to our beginning inventory because they were started last period. And since all the materials are added at the beginning of the process, all the materials were added last period. There would be no more materials that we have to add to our beginning inventory. But what we'd have to do is we have to finish our beginning inventory with respect to the conversion, because remember, they told us that it was 60% complete last period for the conversion cost. So 40% has to be completed during this period of time. In other words, we have to take the beginning inventory whole units and multiply it by 40%, which is the complement of 60% that they gave us. We have to finish 40% this month because 60% was had conversion cost associated with it last month. So in order to find the conversion equivalent units this month for beginning inventory, we have to take our beginning inventory whole units of 10,000 and multiply it by 40%. That's the complement of 60%. So 40% of 10,000 is 4,000 units. To find the units that we have started and completed, you'll remember that if we started the units and finished them, then all of these units that we started would have all the materials associated with them, because 100% of the materials are added at the beginning of the process. If we started 70,000 units, 70,000 units has materials in them. If we completed the units, that means we finished the units with respect to conversion. If we completed 70,000 units, all 70,000 units are complete with respect to conversion. So in other words, units started and completed, the amount 70,000 is going to be the same for materials and conversion, because 70,000 units have all of the materials in there and they have all of the conversion cost in there. Your units transferred were $80,000. To find the units transferred, we would add the beginning materials equivalent units, which was 0, plus the units that were started and completed materials of 70,000. The total amount of materials transferred is 70,000 units. Add these two together. Combine these two together, and that will give you the conversion units that were transferred. So we've accounted for units started and completed. We've accounted for units that are transferred. Now we've got to account for our ending inventory. Notice our ending inventory is 80% completed with respect to conversion. So what that means is 100% is complete with respect to materials. So 100% of the ending inventory units of 15,000 is materials equivalent units. And that's because all the materials were added at the beginning of the process. So all of the ending inventory units have the materials in them. To find the ending inventory conversion units, we completed 80% with respect to conversion this month. So we simply multiply 80% times 12,000, and that would, 80% times 15,000 whole units, and that will give you 12,000. So 80% of 15,000 is 12,000 units. To find the total equivalent units for materials, I've got to combine what I've transferred in materials, this column right here, with my ending inventory materials. 85,000 is my equivalent units for materials. For conversion, it's 74,000 plus 12,000, 86,000 is my equivalent units for conversion. We're going to use these figures when we determine the cost per equivalent unit. Now, they didn't ask us to do this in this particular problem, but they will in the next problem. So this is the first half of the cost of production report using the FIFO method and with the knowledge that 100% of the materials are added at the beginning of the process. Now, in this what if analysis, they changed things up dramatically. And so I really need to explain to you what they did here. And it's all about reading the problem. So you got to read the problem really carefully to understand what they're wanting. So in part 3, it says, what if 60% of the materials were added at the beginning of the process? And so what I put in parentheses here was to help explain that they're not going to be 100% added like they were in that first problem that we did. So what this means is that the materials that we're adding at the beginning of the process are only equal to 60%, not 100% as we used in the previous problem. They also told you the remaining 40% of the materials were added at the end of the process. So what I did is I started it out just like we've done before with the whole units. And what they're asking you for is how many equivalent units of the materials there would be. They're asking you for this part right here, class. But it's easier if you start with the whole units first. So I'm going to review the whole units for you, or we could simply put down the whole units were 10,000 with respect to beginning inventory. That was given. So we had this that was given, and we know that this is also given here. This is the same thing. These are given amounts, 10,000 for the beginning inventory. We have to find the units started and completed. They told us that the units transferred were 80,000. That was a given. So the units started and completed has to be 70,000. The difference between 80,000 and 10,000 is 70,000. They gave us the 15,000 ending inventory whole units. So the ending inventory whole units plus the units transferred is the total units to assign cost. This is basically the same thing that we did in the earlier problem. But what changed is the materials and when they were added and how much was added. They added 60% of the materials at the beginning of the process. So listen up here. This 4,000 is coming from the fact that this is beginning inventory. Remember that beginning inventory comes from your ending inventory from the last period. So the ending inventory for June becomes the beginning inventory for July. And according to this problem, it says 40% were added at the end of the process. So at the end of June, 40% were in the materials account. So when you brought it forward, excuse me, I said that wrong. So in June, 60% of the materials were added because the ending inventory becomes the beginning inventory for this period of time. We would have to use 40% as the amount of our equivalent materials, beginning inventory materials. So in other words, I took 10,000 and multiplied it by 40% because 40% was complete with respect to materials. The unit started and completed is still going to be 70,000 units. So all the materials have to be added during this period of time. They were started and actually finished. So we have 100% of those materials in there. The units transferred then would be 74,000. The units in ending inventory with respect to materials, now we're not talking about conversion here, we're talking about materials, is 60%. And so what we had to do is we had to multiply the ending inventory by 60% of the ending inventory units, which was 15,000. So when you add 9,000 and 74,000 together, it's going to give you 83,000. And that's the answer to the what if analysis. And the reason that it was different is all in the wording of this. So I want to re-emphasize that to you again. So that's why I put this down here in bold. It says the what if analysis in part 3 is assuming that not all materials are added at the beginning of the process. Materials can be added anytime during the process. They can be added at the beginning, they can be added at the end, they can be added at the middle. So you have to read your problem carefully to determine when the materials are added. And in this part 3, since the ending inventory was started last period in June, becomes the beginning inventory in the period for July. The complement of 60% is used to determine the materials equivalent units for the beginning inventory in this period of July. Since the ending inventory for July started in July, 60% of the materials are added to the ending inventory. So I'm just restating what I tried to explain to you here, but this is the key here. You have to read your problem carefully. In the first problem, 100% of the materials were added at the beginning of the process. But in the second problem, that is not what has happened. 60% of the materials were added and 40% were added at the end of the period. So I'm going to move to the next problem where we're going to do another cost of production report. This is for a different company, and they've given you some information about this company. And again, they're telling you that they are using the FIFO method. And this Gunnison company had the following equivalent unit schedule and cost information for its sewing department for the month of December. So they gave you this information right here. I just copied that over from Cengage. And it's kind of messy to me. So I thought it might be more beneficial to you if you go ahead and learn how to do the cost of production report, because all of these problems are really asking you some of the same information over and over again. And if you learn the format of the cost of production report, you're going to understand what they want you to put into the blanks that Cengage asks you to put in. So I would always suggest that you do a cost of production report and then fill in the information that Cengage wants for you. Now, in this particular problem, it tells you that all the materials are going to be added at the beginning of the process. Although this exercise did not ask you to complete a cost of production report, I think it's necessary, I, as the instructor, think it's necessary to understand where the calculations for the answers in Cengage are going to come from. If you will learn how to do the cost of production report, it'll help you to master the concepts in this chapter. Learn the steps in preparing the cost of production report. I use it all the time when I'm trying to solve the problems in this chapter. The cost of production report in this problem is using the FIFO method. So what I want you to remember is we're using the FIFO method, and we're also stating that all of the materials are 100% added at the beginning of the process. So what I would suggest you do is start the cost of production report. This is the cost of production report that I have outlined for you, and it goes all the way down to line 67. The cost of production report starts at 32 and goes to line 67. So in the cost of production report, break it down into two parts. The first part is the units part. The second part is going to be the cost part. The units part is what we did in the last problem. So I've got it set up very similar to what you did in the last problem. That's what I mean by if you learn these steps right here, you can almost solve any problem that we're going to be looking at in this chapter with the FIFO method, because this is how you do it with the FIFO method. Now, weighted average is going to be just a little bit different, but it's sort of the same. And we're going to talk about that in another video. So learn this report first, learn the FIFO method first. And it's really a review of what you already should have learned from ACC 121. Start with your unit section first. Start with your whole units. I would compute all of my whole units first, and then I would worry about my equivalent units. So put in what you do know. And from this problem, the beginning inventory was given. The beginning inventory is right here. Units in beginning inventory are 5,000 units. So right here, I'm starting with 5,000 units. The next thing that you might have to find is the unit started or that you've received. And they don't give you this. So you're going to have to find this. So you remember what I said about the other problem. Put in what you do know first. You don't know what the total units to account for is either. So skip over these two parts right here and put in 5,000. And then we're going to go down here and see if we can break this part down further. This part is a reconciliation to this part or vice versa. This is a breakdown in this part of what's happening up here. We know our beginning inventory units that was given to us. The units that we started and completed were given in this particular problem. Notice it wasn't given in the first problem that we did in this video, but they're given in this one. So plug in what you do know. So I'm going to put 40,000 in for my units started and completed. Well, if I know my beginning inventory units and I know what I've started and completed, I can determine what I've transferred. So you can figure out this 45,000 just by adding these two together. And my ending inventory was given. If you look back up here, you see you got ending inventory. The whole units was 10,000. That was given to you. So if I know my whole units were 10,000 of ending inventory, I can add that to my units transferred, and I can come up with this 55,000. If I know what this total units to be assigned cost are, I know what my total units to account for are, so I can just plug this in right here. See how they match up? So once you get this plugged in, if you know what your beginning inventory units are, you can find what you started during this period of time, which was 50,000 units. So I know that's working backwards at things, but it's simple when you know this part right here. When you write this part down, you can work backwards at it just by filling in the information here. The next step is to compute the equivalent units. We break equivalent units down into materials and conversion. See the two different columns? The equivalent units are the units that we could have finished, but we didn't during this period of time. It's what we could have completed during this period of time. What we do know about the materials, what was given in our information, is that 100% of the materials are added at the beginning of the process. Since beginning inventory comes from last period's ending inventory, all of the beginning inventory units have materials in them. So if materials are 100% added at the beginning of the process, there's no need to add any more materials to our beginning inventory units. We've accounted for those in the last month, the last period. What we'll have to find is our conversion units. Notice, oh dear, let me escape out of there. Okay, all right. Notice that what I did is I took 5,000 units, which is our whole units, and I multiplied it by the conversion cost. Now they told us that the beginning inventory was 50% complete with respect to conversion cost. So this 50% complete is with respect to conversion cost. So 50% of 5,000 is how I would come up with the conversion units. So 50% of 5,000 is 2,500. That's your conversion units. What you started and completed during this period of time will have all materials and all conversion in there. Notice the started and completed units is the same all the way across. If you started them and finished them, you finished them with respect to materials, you finished it with respect to conversion. They're the same all the way across, started and completed units are. Your units transferred then is 40,000 units. That is your beginning inventory units for your materials plus your started and completed materials is 40,000. These two together are 40,000. These two together are 42,500. That's your transferred amounts for conversion cost. Then what we have to do is we have to figure out our materials cost. I'm sorry, not materials cost. We're still on units. We're figuring up our materials and units for ending inventory. Remember that 100% of the materials are added at the beginning of the process. So all materials are in there for your ending inventory. your ending inventory was not finished with respect to conversion. Remember, it says 35% are finished with respect to conversion cost here. So 35% are complete with respect to conversion costs, which is our direct labor and our factory overhead. So we're going to take 10,000 and we're going to multiply that by 35%, and that will give you 3,500 units of ending inventory that are equivalent units for conversion. And then we're going to add our transferred units plus our ending inventory units to get the total equivalent units for conversion. The total equivalent units for materials are the 40,000 plus the 10,000, which is 50,000. We need these items to help to assign cost to our inventory. So the next step is to do the cost section of the cost of production report. We're going to start by determining the cost per equivalent unit. And we'll do a cost per equivalent unit for materials, and we'll do a cost per equivalent unit for conversion. The total cost for December of materials are 400,000. This is given. The 400,000 in current cost comes from materials, which is right here. They're the current cost for this period of time only for materials are 400,000. So that 400,000 is what we plug in here. The 50,000 is our total equivalent units for materials that we found right here. So this 50,000 goes here. And we divide 50,000 units into 400,000, it's going to give me $8, which is my materials cost per equivalent unit. $8 is my materials cost per equivalent unit. 50,000 divided into 400,000 is $8. For your conversion cost, it was given in cell D25. Your conversion cost, I keep messing with that there, but anyway, it's 184,000. It comes from right here. These are your conversion costs for the month. It was given. When you divide your conversion cost by the equivalent units for conversion, which is 46,000. I just pulled that right down here. So this 184,000 divided by 46,000 equivalent units gives you conversion cost per equivalent unit of $4. Now, what they ask you for in the requirements on Cengage was to calculate the unit cost for December using the FIFO method. And the only way I could do that is to break it all down to show you how you get these costs. The materials cost was $8. That came from here. The conversion cost was $4. That came from there. The two of these combined is $12. So what Cengage wanted was the answer of $12, but you have to know how to figure the cost per equivalent unit for materials as well as the cost per equivalent unit for conversion before you can calculate any of the other costs that we're going to be assigning to our inventory. So the first step in figuring up the cost is to find the cost per equivalent unit. Find these two parts first. Then we're going to take our cost and assign them to production. We start with our beginning inventory cost. This is a given amount. Your beginning inventory cost was 45,000. I'm getting that from right there. It was 35,000 plus 10,000 is 45,000, that was given. 45,000 is what we're going to put in right here as your beginning inventory cost. They also want the costs that were incurred only in the month of December. So I'm going to go back up to the given information, and then the amounts that you have incurred during the month of December is 584,000. That was your materials, your labor, and your overhead combined was 584,000. And that's what goes here. I just brought these two figures down, added them together, and that gives you the total cost to account for. This cost right here that's double ruled has to be reconciled with what's happening down here. And if you want to, you could go ahead and put this down here and plug it in, because that's what it's got to end up being. This is a breakdown very similar to how we broke down our units here. We're going to start with our beginning inventory and assign cost to it. Our beginning inventory had a balance that was brought forward from the last period. That balance was 45,000. That was given. Your 45,000 is given right here. You have to find how many materials had to be added as far as costs are concerned to the beginning inventory. Remember, 100% of the materials went in last period. So if it's beginning inventory, it was started last period. All of them are there. You don't have any this period. So it's 0. Notice how I put a 0 here. All right. Now, in this part right here, students always asking me about how do I calculate this? How do I calculate this? So listen up carefully. We're in the conversion column. So we have to add some conversion costs to our beginning inventory to get the beginning inventory cost finished. To get them completely finished, we need to add the conversion cost for this period of time. So what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to pick up the conversion units, which were 2,500 units. That's what we found here. And you're going to multiply it by the cost of the equivalent unit for conversion, which is $4. 2,500 times $4 is how I get 10,000. That's my conversion cost that I needed to finish the beginning inventory. I had no materials cost plus the conversion cost. That gives me this little subtotal over here, which is the total of these two added together, 10,000. My total beginning inventory cost then would be 55,000. I'm going to get that by adding 45,000 that was given plus the 10,000 that we just determined to complete the beginning inventory. The total cost of the beginning work in process is 55,000. The next thing is to assign cost to those units that are started and completed. So we know that we're going to have some materials because we're starting these units, and the materials are added at the beginning of the period. So I'm going to go back up to my equivalent units, materials. I'm going to look at what I started and completed, which was 40,000 units. 40,000 units of my materials has to be multiplied by the materials cost per equivalent unit of $8. So 40,000 times $8 is how I get 320,000. That's my materials cost of my started and completed units. Since I started and finished those units, all of the conversion costs have been added. So I'm going to go to my conversion cost for my unit started and completed. I'm in the conversion column now. For equivalent units, started and completed was 40 units. I'm going to multiply that by my cost per equivalent unit for conversion, which is $4. When I multiply that, 40,000 times $4, it will give me 160,000. That's my conversion cost for my started and completed units. My materials plus my conversion cost are the total cost of conversion, which are 480,000. And then we're going to figure out what our transferred costs are. Because remember, beginning inventory units plus what you started and completed gives you what you transferred. Now I'm just going to assign a cost to those transferred units. This was my beginning inventory cost total, 55,000. And this was my total for my started and completed units, 480,000. Add the two together, that gives you 535,000. That's what you transferred out. This is what would come out of the work in process ledger account on the credit side. This is the amount that we would have transferred out of work in process. So following what we did here, the next step would be to find the ending inventory cost. The cost of our ending inventory are going to consist of materials. All of the ending inventory materials are added during this month. The ending inventory materials equivalent units was 10,000 units. 10,000 times $8 gives you 80,000, which is your materials cost for your ending inventory. Next, you'll find your ending inventory conversion cost. Your conversion costs are going to be the ending inventory right here, 3,500 units times $4 will give you $14,000. The conversion cost plus the materials cost will give you the total cost of ending inventory, which is $94,000. That would be the balance in your work in process account at the end of the month. When we add what we transferred plus the balance in the work in process, that gives us the total cost that we have assigned, these two added together, which has to equal this. And that's all there is to the cost of production report. Learn this. If you don't do anything else in this chapter, learn this. In part 2, they wanted you to calculate the cost of the goods that were transferred out, the cost of the ending work in process, and they wanted you to reconcile the cost with the assigned cost to account for. And so these items are what Cengage wanted you to put in their little blanks. And these items we've already found, so it kind of makes it simple for you. If you do this cost of production report, you got your information right there. The cost of the ending work in process is 94,000. Just bring it down. Your beginning work in process was 45,000. I'm sorry, pick up this 45,000 here, because that was your beginning work in process. That came from the beginning of the month. And then they wanted the current cost next, which is 584,000. And the total cost are 629,000. That's all they wanted in part 2. So if you know how to do that cost of production report, you really know how to do this too. Part 3, what if you were asked for the unit cost for the month of November? So what we were doing up here is the month of December. They're asking you to go back and recalculate the cost. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at our direct materials cost for November. They gave us this information. The direct materials cost that were brought forward were 35,000. That came from last period's ending inventory. So last month it was 35,000. The conversion costs were 10,000 from last month. These two items are given to you. The equivalent units, and since they're asking for November's cost, only thing we know about is beginning inventory. They're your direct materials equivalent units. So last month, your ending inventory became the beginning inventory. And we had 5,000 units there. And because 100% of the materials were added last month, all 5,000 units are beginning inventory units. For my conversion, I have to figure out how many units were finished with respect to conversion last month. And because they told us 50% was completed with respect to conversion last month, half of the 5,000 units were completed last month. That's 2,500. Then you'll determine the equivalent unit. The cost of the equivalent unit is 35,000 divided by 5,000 units. The cost per equivalent unit for conversion is $10,000 divided by 2,500 units, which will give you $4 per unit. So the grand total of last month's cost are $11. And management would compare these costs with what happened this month. You can see that our materials cost increased $1, but our conversion cost stayed basically the same. So what I'd want to do is check on our suppliers, see if we can get a better deal for that, try to figure out why the cost went up. Might be able to get a better deal, may not, but this is something management would be concerned about. On the next exercise, we're getting away from a company that's producing items such as barbecue sauce that we were producing in one of the problems we just did. We're going to be a service business here. And so what they told us is we're going to be a local barbershop, and the barbershop cuts the hair of 12,000 customers per month. That's how many haircuts they do. The clients are men, and the barbers offer no special styling. I don't know about that for you men out there, but evidently these men don't want any special styling done to their hair. They just want a haircut. During the month of May, 1,200 customers were serviced. So they want you to find the cost of the haircuts, and they gave you the labor, the materials, and the overhead, which all combined are $12,000. So to find the cost of the haircut, we simply divide 12,000 by 1,200 haircuts that we did during this month of May. So $10 is the cost of the haircut. Also, just-in-time manufacturing, JIT is just-in-time manufacturing, can use process costing. And just-in-time manufacturing are where we try not to keep any inventories on hand at all. We just try to complete the products that we are working on during that period of time. We only get materials in when we start the production of our units for that period of time. There's no leftover ending inventory usually with just-in-time inventory. But just-in-time manufacturing businesses can use the process cost accounting system. That's what they're trying to drive home in these last two little exercises that we're doing. It doesn't have to be a manufacturing business. But in this case, just-in-time manufacturing is a manufacturing business. It can be a service business that uses process cost as well. There are several manufacturing sales that are set up in one of its factories. One of the important items about the just-in-time manufacturing system is they don't do a traditional line type of item when they're producing units. They'll have a group of people that work on the units together, and then they take the units in one cell and they transfer them to another cell where it's worked on again. And it's not just a traditional line that they're working in. They're making flat screen TVs for this particular company, and we want to know the cost of production for the month of April. And they've given us basically the cost of production. They're telling us that there are 30,000 stands that were produced and sold. So it's not flat screen TVs that they're producing. They're producing the stands for these. And so 30,000 of the stands to hold the TVs were produced and sold. So again, all you do is add up your cost, which are 330,000 in this case, and divide it by the number of stands produced, and that'll give you the cost per stand. And that's all I want to talk to you about today. I'm going to stop here, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.